Schools. Pioneer mothers conducted schools in bouncing covered wagons and isolated cabins. Often the textbook was the family Bible. Sometimes children from neighboring homesteads gathered for a few hours a week to learn the alphabet and the basics of reading. When class size outgrew a settler's cabin, class moved to nearby buildings. At Hans Peak, classes met at the blacksmith's shop. At Sydney, they were held in an empty saloon. Because it took several years to create and secure funding for a school district, the first schools were organized by homesteaders who supplied land, materials, labor, and room and board for the teacher if there was no teacherage. A teacherage is a small building adjacent to the school where a teacher could live. Lulie Crawford describes the first school.
If you could have looked in at the opening of the first public school in Steamboat Springs in October 1883, you would have seen a small group of children assembled in one of the rooms of our log cabin. By the time the second term had arrived, we moved into a log building which had been built by my father for a storehouse and was not far from the cabin. We had a homemade blackboard and desks and felt we had made an advance. The children too learned how to learn. We had for our school motto, not how much, but how well.
Rural schools accommodated grades 1 through 8, but teachers occasionally tutored high school students who were unable to board in town with relatives or friends, or if ranch work prevented students from attending school regularly. Schools also served as community meeting and social centers for dances, dinners, and other community gatherings. Some districts were so small they had 1 or 2 families, some so large that several schools were organized. They were centrally located in order to accommodate students and teachers who often walked or rode a horse or a mule many miles to school. Few had sheds for horses, and area ranchers supplied feed and hay. Between 1883 and 1960, more than 90 schools were operated in Routt County. Although improving roads and busing programs prompted consolidation, there were still 30 rural schools open in the early 1950s. By 1958, there were only 9. At this time, parents required higher quality curriculum, and there was a lack of local funds to support rural schools. The School District Reorganization Act of 1957 mandated the reduction of rural schools to a minimum. Routt County responded by creating 3 districts from 26. In Steamboat Springs, the first classes were held at the Crawford home until a log school was built on Soda Creek in 1884. In 1890, a large 2-story school was built on Pine Street. In 1879, high school classes were added and the first 3 grades were moved to other locations. A year after the frame school was destroyed by fire in 1910, a new 3-story brick and stone school was built on the same site on Pine Street. Soda Creek Elementary School was built in 1956, and the old brick building was torn down in 1967.
In 1935, I went out to this red schoolhouse, and I taught there for 3 years. They had a little house in the back with 2 rooms that I lived in during the 3 years that I taught out there. And all of the schoolroom had desks like this. And as the first thing we did in the morning was salute the flag. We always pledged allegiance to the flag. Sometimes we had a song and sometimes we didn't. My task was not only teaching, but I was also the janitor. I had to build a fire, which we had a large heating stove, which probably most of you don't know anything about, which we used coal in, and I had to keep the schoolhouse warm. I had to do the cleaning, I had to sweep the floor, and I had to wash the blackboards. I had to do all of the janitor work. Sometimes I had some of the older boys carrying the coal and the wood from the coal house, which was back of the schoolhouse. Some of the youngsters rode horses, and so there was a barn in the back of the school grounds in which they could keep their horses. And of course, we didn't have modern plumbing, so we had outside toilets, one for the boys and one for the girls. Probably our first thing in the morning, we always taught reading, arithmetic, and writing. We had penmanship, Palmer method penmanship, and we had to have that. Those three things we had to have. Then sometimes I had from grades 1 through, we didn't have kindergarten, I had grades 1 through 8, and that meant that I had a lot of classes. So sometimes we had to have spelling, we used spelling and English together, or language, whichever you want to call it. And sometimes we would have history one day and something else another day. With so many classes, you had to combine your subjects. In the Mesa, this schoolhouse, the Mesa, had two side rooms. One we had for a library, and the other we had, I had a table for the first and second graders. When they finished their reading, I would let them go in there and color or read while I had the upper grade. A lot of times on Friday afternoon, we would have spelling bees. We would choose sides and have it spelled out. Or everybody would line up and we would spell together, and if you missed a word, you sat down. We had 15-minute recesses in the morning and in the afternoon. School started at 9 o'clock in the morning and ended at 4 in the afternoon. We had a 15-minute recess in which they ran out, played for a few minutes, and then an hour long at noon. And during the winter time, sometimes they would bring their skis and go skiing. That was another thing. I always went outside and played with the children. We played games. Ante over, threw the ball over the schoolhouse, and had side, played run, sheep, run, and a lot of games that you probably don't know, steel sticks, a lot of games that you probably don't know anything about. But anyway, those were the games, some of the games we played. And we also played baseball. But I had to do all of my own work. All of my own work. I had no one to take care of the property. Oh yes, we carried our water from a well in an open bucket and with a dipper in it. And each child had their own glass or cup with their name on it on a stand by the door where the pail was, and they would use the dipper and fill their glasses. They never drank out of the dipper, at least they weren't supposed to. Sometimes you caught someone doing it, but anyway, they weren't supposed to. They never left their seats without permission. And in those days, you raised your hand. And if you were given permission to leave your seat, otherwise you never left your seat. And on Friday afternoons, we sometimes had art. We didn't have art or drawing or music every day. Those were something that with 8 grades to teach, you didn't have time for. But on Friday afternoons, we sometimes would draw or we would have singing. We did exchange programs with other schools sometimes, the South Side, which is a schoolhouse out on 20 Mile Road. And we sometimes went there and played baseball with them or had exchange of programs. And we had programs on all of the holidays and had the neighbors come in. We always had little plays and recitations and